Hi, I'm Steve Gompertz of QRx Partners, and welcome to this week's Quality Heretic. Our topic for this week is inspections and the over reliance on those inspections. I think this is a concept that's seems to be well understood, or at least should be. If you talk to anybody in quality, they'll tell you, yeah, of course you can inspect quality in. But I still see a lot of it, that's the way things work. I'm not sure what's driving that, but it's something I feel like I have to point out. As I often do, I'm going to go back to Deming and his Out of Crisis book and his 14 points. And this time we're going to look at point number three, where he came right out and said it. Cease dependence on inspection to achieve quality. So Deming understood this long ago. If you think about it, the whole point of doing inspections is to find nonconformances that are already there, right? Um, and wouldn't it be better if there wasn't anything to find? And I'll get into that in a little bit, but that's really what it should be about, rather than hoping that you're going to be able to find these things before the customer does, right? Because that's really all it is about, is let's discover our nonconformances before we give them to our customers, where costs will be higher to get the product back and replace it, and you lose credibility and those kind of things. One of the things that's really important to remember, why inspection is not particularly a good way to go, other than its reactive approach, is this understand you have to have this understanding that 100% inspection is not 100% effective. Now, typically we apply some sort of sampling plans out of ANSI like Z1.4 to reduce, right? So we don't do 100%. But it's all based on this concept that whatever inspection we do certainly will find us our problems. Okay. Years ago, I took a class in human factors, and it was really fascinating. And the guy who was teaching it had all kinds of great statistics. And one of them he brought up, and I don't remember the exact number, but he said if you've got any sort of human initiated inspection, right, or you're relying on a human being to perform the inspection, at best, you can expect something on the order of 60% effectiveness by that person. And here was the real kicker. They can only maintain that for about 20 minutes. After that, it suddenly falls off and they have to reset. And then it's this long climb back up to that full level at 60%, which they can do for 20 minutes. And then something interrupts them or they just get tired, they get distracted, and it's like falling off a cliff. It goes back down to next to nothing in terms of effectiveness, right? And that's where things get missed. First of all, you've got that 40% that they're not hitting in the first place. And then there's this fall off back down to nearly zero. And he had statistics on the amount of time it takes to refresh and get back up to peak performance, and that was a long period. So it's just very flawed. And then this idea, well, we automate things now. We've got visual scanners and things like that. Again, they're not perfect, especially the harder it is. I know it's very common, like if you're doing fill operations and you don't want any sort of particulates in the liquid, right? To shine a light through it and use a visioning system to look for sparkles, right? If there's glass or something in there. But that assumes that you're going in the moment that this thing passes in front of the camera, that whatever the object is you're going to catch is going to be in right position to reflect some light, right? At just that right moment. That's not going to happen 100% of the time. Now that gets into the whole thing of test method validation, which I'm not going to go deeply in today, but just remember that that's a big part of any inspection you do, right? Inspections are tests. And so you can't just automatically assume that because you thought up the way to inspect it, that that's actually an effective test, right? That's why we do test method validation to determine, is it capable? Is it repeatable? Is it reproducible? Maybe I'll do some sections on those terms later because I know those get misunderstood as well. But again, this is part of the problem of relying on inspection, is that it is just flawed as an approach. And the idea again is that what you're finding is it's all after the fact, right? Now, I was making that point just previously about that there's no type of inspection that is capable of being 100% effective. It just doesn't exist. So you're kidding yourself if you think, that all these fancy tools and, whatever you've got, optical comparators and visioning systems and, coordinate measuring machines, they're great at improving things, but sometimes there's a diminishing, effect here, and they're not really going to be 100%. Um, And claiming anything other than that is just ridiculous. I remember working at a place and I just started, and we had a big client come in, wanted to do an audit. And as we were doing the tour, it was my first, literally like my first days. So I didn't know anything of the operation. So the director of ops said, "Don't worry, I'm going to cover this. Just watch me because we do great in audits and we'll do great on this one." And as we were going through the production area, and he was proudly talking about how we do 400% inspection here. And so they could rely on the quality of our products. And I kind of went, "Oh my gosh." Right. And what it was is he meant that we were doing 100% inspection 4 times within the process. And in his mind, that was perfection times four. Right. And of course, right away, the director of quality from our client turned and looked at me like, "Seriously?" And I said, "I'm going to work on this." So, anyway, you got to be careful of those kind of over reliance because inspection is not going to be capable of telling you what you really think it will. And again, the whole point of inspections is that you're trying to find things that are already wrong, which seems to be the wrong approach, don't you think? Really, what you should be focusing on is improving the processes so that they aren't capable of creating the nonconformance, right? How do you eliminate nonconformance opportunity? That's a process thing. You do that ahead of time, and then you get to that level of confidence where you can reduce the inspections or maybe even eliminate the inspections because you've been able to validate that the process is fully capable and totally reliable. Now, I'd be careful about, again, anything I talked about on a previous episode about setting objectives that are at the extremes of 0 or 100%. But you get it. You can optimize a lot better by focusing on what the process does and in terms of creating opportunity for non-conformance. And then, like I said, the other piece is that you want to focus your inspections on the essential characteristics. If that sounds familiar, it's because you should have read that whenever you read about design outputs in whichever quality management system standard or regulation you're applying, right? That part of design outputs isn't just the specifications, the lengths, the widths, the height, the width, the weight. It's also you need to include how are you going to confirm, right, and validate that this thing does what you intended it to do, whether it's at the component level or the subassembly level or the full system level. But you're supposed to identify what is it that's critical to the performance of that, okay? And that's then what you can focus on in your inspections instead of overdoing it. And again, your product and process design should have focused on those things that are critical to, again, remove those opportunities for nonconformance. So, bottom line, don't rely too much on inspection. It's not telling you what you think it is. Certain things you certainly, if you know they're critical, I'd want to inspect them anyway, just to be sure. I mean, if anybody want a pacemaker that went through no inspections, not me. I would like to know some inspections occurred, but understanding that that better not have been the only approach towards managing nonconformance and assuring quality in the device. As always, let's hear it in the comments, get a good discussion going, and I'll see you next week.